Excellent.
Okay. Execute. So I was explaining, Kathy Roscoe was the one speaker where I couldn't get her here physically. Kind of strange thing about the seminar time. They sort of get people to come to still teach their courses. But Kathy's the one who very kindly Skyped in for the last hour and a half with the students and the student guys. But she did a very good thing. She sent us the PowerPoint that she talked through with the students, and it's under. If you forgot where the website is, just email me and I'll send you the link. But it's under the role of play category, and her presentation is here. PowerPoint about play and literacy, and she's got an oral narration that goes over it, so it's like a movie. And she talks right through it just the way she did with the students. It's part historical, but it's also reviewing a lot of the research and bringing it up to nowadays. She reported today about an AERA study under AERA Open. I'll get a hold of it and put it up on the website here, where there's a lot of worry about the status of play in early childhood classrooms right now. And she gave a statistic when we were talking to her just now about when they studied, asked elementary school teachers. I forget what the time frame was, but I think it was about a decade ago. Did they have play areas in their classrooms? And about 87% said that they did. They had actually organized play, play reenactments, dramatic kind of things. So they asked them again about 2010, I think she said, and it had gone down to about 37%. So 50% fewer teachers were reporting that they had any kind of play area in the classroom. And one of the things that Kathy talks about in her PowerPoint, also talked about with us, is what that means. And I'm going to kind of share with you some of the reasons why, and some of the reasons why, especially since there's a whole lot of psychologists in this room, we ought to be kind of worried about it in terms of child development. So Kathy's also given us some of the articles that she has written recently. And the key question here has to do with how we can support early literacy development. So I wanted to start out and share with you a couple things that happened to me today. One was, this is by way of inviting everybody to be part of this stuff in some way or another. But I submitted an AmeriCorps proposal this morning. Boy, don't ever try to write an AmeriCorps grant. It is miserable. I want to find the person to put the website together for the e-grant system where you have to submit it. And I want to get a big hammer and beat the hell out of it. But I get that done this morning, and what it's going to do is going to put 25 tutors, college-age tutors, in 10 schools across the city starting in the fall, if I'm successful with us. And so I've done a lot of work the last 6 months, just getting into the schools and working with the people, trying to figure out what they needed. And so it's this constellation of colleges as well as schools as well as college students eventually that are going to be part of this project as it gets started. I'll know by May if it gets funded. I've talked with Andrew about somehow being involved with other sorts of grants that we could write that are based on that. So that's one of the things that I'm involved in. Second thing is, I just found out yesterday, I'm going to lead the standards revision for preparing reading teachers across the state. That's going to be a task force that's going to start actually next week. And what I have to do is write the document, start it based on current research and existing standards about what the reading standards could be, and then go through a series of public hearings with people across the state between now and the summer, eventually presenting it to the state board in October. This could launch a whole different way that people in Tennessee look at standards in terms of education of children, but also education of teachers. So that's something I'll be involved in. And if you're interested, I'll be glad to share with you the documents that I prepare as part of it and tell you a little bit about the process at the same time. So I'm very excited about that. So what we're talking today is about early literacy and the role of play. And so.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
I mean, you have to go to basketball.
Well, see, unlike us, not the rest of the world has learned that we have electronic. So yes, as soon as I sign the contract next week, I'll have to get started on basketball. Because one of the things, I did this sort of work in Michigan for a long time, and it's very much a person-to-person sort of thing, relationship. And so, first thing, conversation we're going to have is about creating a task force itself and how to make it well represented. And there are interesting political issues like should professors be involved, how should they be involved? Do we really want to hear from teachers that are in the trenches, things like that? So, a lot of politics that go along naturally sort of thing. So, just a side that we've all through creating a teacher evaluation system for the state of Michigan. Spent 3 years of her life on it. She's the dean of the College of Education in Michigan, and she prepared then for the state board. Threw it out. So this is what happens sometimes. So early literacy development. I have to confess, I spent most of my career in middle schools, and so little kids is something. Till I got to Memphis, I hadn't thought about much because mostly I spent a lot of time with the older kids with bad sense of humor. And when I got to Memphis, I started confronting these problems of kids very early on and on up through the grades that were not learning how to read for some reason. So my recent kind of reintroduction to little kids has been this guy, and that's Owen. He's my first grandchild, and that's the ukulele that I made for him.
It's too big.
Yeah, he'll grow into it though. But more I thought, I love this picture, obviously. But the thing that I really thought about is kind of the theme of today, which is this goes back to some of the things we've said before, the tension between what people say ought to happen and the human side in terms of what human experience is like and what could happen in terms of helping people develop. And so what you have here is grandfather very unashamedly teaching him something that I like in my life, but I'm not sitting there giving him a worksheet in the letter U to be able to understand what a ukulele is. But there are some people that would advocate that that's exactly what I should do. And just to show you how that works, we go back to the National Reading Panel report in 2001, which is still very much alive today. They're taking parts of this and attaching it to what's left of the Common Core, even though the Common Core never said anything about these things. And so we've got the favorite variables that everybody likes to talk about. And this is being picked up with early literacy instruction. I'm going to show you another document where it was really picked up for early literacy instruction. But alphabetic knowledge, phonics instruction, phonemic awareness. Sorry, I got phonics instruction on there twice, which is probably the way they would like it. Guided oral reading, vocabulary instruction, and comprehension instruction is kind of being the major kind of variables. So it's basically sound symbol relationships, understanding the alphabet, having word knowledge, and comprehending things is kind of the mantra that we've heard at least since 2001. But, yes, sir.
So, a lot of the research that I've seen various places now, they're talking about motivation, sort of aspects to things. I didn't see anything that is concerned with the student's desire to learn.
No. Oh.
You kind of ignore motivation in this model.
Yes, and that's part of the dilemma that I want to pose today. Something that Kathy was talking about in terms of when you take a look at 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, a lot of times we don't sitting there and they're drawing things. We don't know what they're doing and why they're doing it. And a lot of times what they're doing is they're emulating adults who are the older children. My grandson Owen now, he started walking a couple weeks ago, and he now goes over and he picks out a book and hands it to his mom. We don't know if he necessarily has any kind of idea about what that is, except he loves sitting on his mom's lap and having her read it to him. But it's that larger social context that's really, really key. I might have shared before, I didn't read a book in school until I was grade. Like Mark, I was sitting there reading comic books. I refused to read things. Motivation is a huge, huge thing. One of the things about this topic of early literacy, motivation of young kids is something that is really kind of hard to understand because they don't just sit there and tell you I'm motivated. You can often find out when they're unmotivated. but that's obviously a very, very critical issue that you don't see represented well in the policy documents. And so I'm going to show you another one, and we get the same sort of problem. The National Early Reading Panel report, which is different from the National Reading Panel report. This is put together by the Tim Shanahan and some of the people that are in the NYAEC, Early Young Childhood Association. And you'll see a lot of the same kinds of stuff that you see on the National Reading Panel report. So it's concepts about print, left to right, front, back, book cover, author text, print knowledge, the concepts about print and early decoding. I'm sorry, I should back that up. There's a whole other list here. It starts with this, code-focused interventions, shared reading interventions. Wait a minute. I get this right. Andrew, the arrows are going the wrong way. There we go. Okay. National Early Reading Panel report. Alphabetic knowledge, phonological awareness, rapid automatic naming of letters, automaticity, rapid automatic naming of objects and colors, writing letters in isolation, writing to one's name, phonological memory, ability to remember spoken information for a short time. If you look at this and you look at the National Reading Panel report, they're pretty similar. And it's these low-level kind of decoding sorts of skills. And it gets a little bit richer when you take a look at what they refer to as literacy skills. And they include all of these in the list. The concepts about print, the print knowledge, the reading readiness, these are actually combinations of what's on the previous list. Okay. So then we get into effective practices. And these are actually programs that have been kind of proven to be effective. So the things like code-focused interventions, this would be hooked on phonics, things like that. Shared reading interventions, reading to children, which is a big part of programs like Head Start and Even Start, federal-based kind of programs. Parent and home programs teach the parents, and there's actually a lot of controversy about the parent and home programs from the standpoint that if you go out and you teach the parents what they should do on behalf of reading instruction, it's potentially insulting, because some of the programs that go out and try to do that make the assumption that the parents don't know what the heck they're doing. They gotta fill the empty vessel with instruction and kind of run roughshod over what literacy practices might be happening in the house in the first place. Other programs are more sensitive to that. And then a big one, and you see this a lot in Kathy Roscoe's research, language enhancement programs, where you're improving young children's language development from a variety kind of different sorts of ways.
So,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
One thing that David Pearson emphasizes, reading to children can help motivation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help them learn. It has almost no impact. It's often used as a substitute for real effective instruction.
The parallel to that is what Kathy said about play environments.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you just throw a bunch of stuff at kids, they'll play, but it won't necessarily get them to learn anything. Mm-hmm. Versus if you create an environment in such a way that, and I'm going to show you an example of this, where there's stuff there that piques their curiosity, that's problem-based, that really kind of engages them in text, then they're going to learn something. Mm-hmm. And so the really difficult thing, she was talking about this, is how do you craft that in a way that's not overly obvious, particularly as kids get older, as they sense that there's adult-like learning going on, everything stops. Versus can you create a play environment where it's motivational and they engage themselves, but they feel like they have choice and control. And so it's actually pretty tricky. And you're right. If you just slap them on your lap and you just start reading, that's not necessarily going to be helpful. If you take the brown bear stories, which are predictable books, and you deliberately read those, the book actually will do some instruction, because the kid, we just sent my grandson Jimmy Fallon's book, and it's called Dad. But on every page, the mom is trying to tell the kid to say Dad, or what's the animal? And the kid says what the animal is at the end, and gets together and says, okay, now let's put it all together, let's say Dad. And his whole thing with his own son was to try to get his son to say Dad. And so the whole book was organized around that. It's a predictable book as you go from page to page because the same kind of response is expected in each section. And ultimately, it didn't work. The first word the kid said was mom. But it was an attempt to kind of create something that was playful and would get the kid to actually learn the sounds that he wanted to learn. So here's Nell Duke's take on what you just saw. It's easier to master skills are being attended to, but the broader domains of accomplishment that constitute preparation for comprehension and learning at a later grade, vocabulary knowledge, comprehensive strategies, and conceptual and content knowledge are being neglected. Near stagnation of fourth grade students' reading comprehension achievements is surprising. So what happens in early literacy, if everybody looks at the stuff that ostensibly is easier to deal with, and one of the things I'm excited about sharing this with you all is that you don't necessarily do this in the technology development that you're doing, okay? And yet, when I go out to the schools and I see what's happening with young children, when a kid's being bad, they slap them in front of a computer program that's teaching phonemic awareness by showing them a picture of a pig and saying, what is this? The kid says it's a pig or picks the words from that, and that's the extent of the instruction. And so they pick the variables that are easiest to get at, and then they ignore the ones that are highly motivational and potentially the most impactful in terms of the kids learning. So if we go to what Nell focuses a lot of her attention on, it's project-based learning, which is characterized with a purpose and not just learning to read. Like I said, I'll show you an example of this in a minute. Writing for an audience and not just for a teacher, and it's engaged instruction, and these are the ways that she characterizes what it means to be engaged. So you notice here, it doesn't exclude things like phonics instruction, but it definitely creates a context. It's a broader context. It's an environment, as Kathy Roskos would say, where the kids are actually learning something. So I want to show you an example here of something called concept-oriented reading instruction. This is John Guthrie and Alan Wingfield and Gene Dreyer. It's a program that they developed at the University of Maryland, and this is with third graders. This is one of the videos. What you're going to see is a video that is about understanding the weather. Okay, so the kids are asking questions. They've generated some questions ahead of time about how weather works. And then what happens is that they pursue those questions with a huge variety of materials that are available to them. They don't go to the library. There's just a huge cart just full of all sorts of books that they can choose. And it ends up being a really huge, elaborate research project on their part, trying to find answers to the questions that they've already generated.
If a change in the weather is coming, these students at Roslyn Heights Elementary School will be among the first to know it.
And no wind, and the wind is sort of blowing. The temperature is about 30.
These kids are becoming avid readers, and not just of thermometers and barometers.
Go back to class.
So I have gotten this really great book, and it's called Storm Chasers.
Teacher Margaret Barnes uses a framework called CORI to teach reading comprehension skills to second and third graders. CORI stands for Concept-Oriented Reading Instruction, and it was developed by Dr. John Guthrie. Organized mostly around nonfiction books, each 18-week reading unit guides kids to come up with their own questions, dig up facts, integrate findings, and share the highlights with the class.
And when they go over the water, they turn into water spouts.
Students pursue their own interests with hands-on experiences, which research shows boosts motivation more than, say, simply looking at pictures. Kids are also encouraged to ask their own questions.
The questions I'm trying to answer are cloud questions. My first one is, how many clouds are there and how do clouds float?
Key to Corey is a large collection of interesting texts from haikus to history.
I like to have a lot of books to choose from so that I can get information, but it's hard to choose from because there's so many, and I like tornado books, but I have to look at cloud books so that I can get information.
We know that choice is one of those intrinsic motivators. Social interaction is an intrinsic motivation. But when children have choice to find their book and then be able to talk with their friends about what they found, and maybe someone will share, hey, I found this about tornadoes. Why don't you read this book? And they can recommend a book. Then that just lends itself to more engagement.
Corey offers kids explicit strategies for pulling information out of a text. By thinking aloud, Ms. Barnes shows students how to distinguish more critical from less important facts.
Wheel, wheel, sirens blare. People hurry to a radio or TV and quickly flick it on. I wonder why they're doing that. I'm starting to think about this. As you read, you think about things and you kind of start to make questions in your mind.
Ms. Barnes has also shown her students how to find information by using an index, glossary, or table of contents. After the students' own questions have been posed and researched, and after the facts have been sifted and connected, kids then communicate their findings to the class.
Reports from wacky weather. Did you know it can snow pink snow? Well, it can, because when wind picks up dark pink dust, it carries it to snow clouds, and then it snows pink snow.
Being able to communicate to others is an aspect of Corey that's important because it validates that children are learning for the sake of learning. And when they ask their own questions and find answers and are able to express that and communicate that to others, it validates that they're a learner, that they're a thinker and a reader and a writer.
Nate, did anything break in the farm? Well, I think that the farm got knocked down and stuff, but not those three things.
Research shows that Corey works. Kids in Corey classrooms are not only more motivated and curious than kids who get traditional instruction, they also score higher on reading achievement and conceptual knowledge. Some kids don't enjoy reading fiction, and boys in particular can become suddenly engaged by an invitation to explore nonfiction topics. Corey aims for an impact beyond elementary school.
I've watched children's lives change because they may never have thought of themselves as a good reader. It changes the way they see school, changes the way they see themselves as readers and writers. They remember it always. They remember the experiences they have in Corey classrooms forever.
So those are slightly older kids, and I'll segue back to thinking about 3- and 4-year-olds. Yeah, go ahead.
In your example, I kind of looking for Martin.
Yeah, I was looking at it today. I had the same reaction, Phil. Yeah.
They're in Utah or something, right?
Yeah, but they were in the Baltimore public schools, and I have a story to share about that. They had practice list. Talking to Dean Dreher a couple of years ago, and they got kicked out of Baltimore public schools, and they had a really successful run there with a lot of high poverty schools. The reason they got kicked out of the schools was that they looked at this and said, "Plan, that's not instruction." So a lot of the stuff that we looked at in terms of standards today, people had kind of a knee-jerk reaction. But, well, we don't want to do that. We want to do stuff where we're going to really teach them kind of technical literacy. The belief was that would make them pass the human tests.
Kind of interesting because I almost had the opposite reaction, which was that so these kids are already seem to be motivated to reach with these academic topics. So I felt like it was not play enough, maybe, for some kids, particularly for kids who might not come from an educated background.
Sure. So you back up to, and this is where I want to take this next, you back up to 3- or 4-year-olds, and you think about some of the features of this that seem to make it work. And you think about, and Kathy was talking about, the thing that they're really concerned about before is working with the language, getting with the language. So you think about what would a play environment look like? where they're able to experiment with language and explore their interests. He talked about 3 different kinds of things to do. One is that the play is purely social. Some kids, like my daughter, when she went to school, said, I go to school to have lunch with my friends, that's all I care about. Versus some kids will look at play as exploring concepts. So there's things in my world that versus another way of looking at it is kids will use play as a way of kind of figuring out how to read and write. Okay, so Kathy showed us a slide earlier. Kids are sitting in a group and they're saying, hey, we're doing writing. Writing's really cool. Kids are like 4. One kid said, yeah, writing's just drawing lines. Yeah, we're drawing lines. and that was the nature of the play there. But if you look at the features of this, it's engagement, motivation, the larger context and purpose, and opportunity to do it. And there may or may not be an adult hovering around sometimes here. Versus if you take a look at what I see a lot in classrooms out there, what I'm seeing is a lot of the linguistic kind of that are embedded in standards copy, not so much. And the real worry, if you take a look at the recent stuff about other play areas, is that we're raising a group of kids that are not getting much opportunity to play, experiment, explore. But what they are getting opportunity to do is be instructed to adapt all of the linguistic skills. And it doesn't mean that the linguistic skills aren't important. The big thing that I got from thinking about this, what really needs to happen is lots of language, lots of conversation. That's where the language conversation, that's where the language development happens. And it can be more intentional. It can be a little less deliberate or more deliberate. The adults are still responsible for kind of creating the environment. But if all you're going to do is whip out worksheets or a computer program, focus on that list of skills only, the thing that you risk is not going to motivate the kids. You're not necessarily going to play them as they are. So that's what Zach's question about play. Yeah.
So, I'd recommend a movie, Who Do We Invade Next?
Oh, Roger Moore.
Roger Moore. I
Yeah.
just saw it Saturday.
Yeah.
It is great.
Yeah.
And they talk about Finland, who's way up here.
Right.
And they have more of this orientation, and play is a part of it. They have no homework.
Yeah. And they also,
It's a completely different mindset. And of course, in international student assessments, they're
Right.
way up there.
they also don't. Yep,
Yeah.
yeah. They also don't get. They don't worry about getting kids to read until after they're 7. Versus here we've almost got entrance exams for kids going into kindergarten.
And one other point is they're getting rid of physical education over the many decades. That's the first to go. So you have all these, and sedentariness is the #1 health hazard. More than drugs, smoking, fights, whatever. Add them all up. Just being sedentary is the worst health.
Yeah. So I think Finland is a random association with that. I think they have a constitutional right to like exercise.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
really?
Yeah. Answer so.
What was the name?
It's Who Do We Invade?
Who do we invade next?
Roger Moore.
Roger Moore.
It's Michael Moore.
Michael Moore.
Yeah.
I just said Roger Moore.
That's a different guy. And just as a side, Michael Moore is a native of Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
And I worked in Flint for 3 years at the same school that Rachel Maddow recently had her show
Oh.
at Holmes Middle School. So that's part of where I kind of cut my teeth in some of the things I do now in terms of getting into these environments and looking at the kind of instruction that happens, the kind of affordances that happen with kids. So this notion of play isn't trivial. And I'm not talking about, you can imagine going up to somebody on IES saying, give me a whole bunch of money so I can get the kids to play. And I encourage you to read Kathy's stuff because she talks about very seriously, what does it take to create a play environment where they actually learn? And I'll share a little bit more about that with you in a minute here. So it's kind of critical. And where I resonate to it as I think about myself, as I got older, I picked up on things that were just fun. And I know a lot of you have versions of this too, but that's how you keep learning. And kind of forgetting that with 3 and 4-year-olds, and that's problematic. So the other people I want to mention in terms of the landscape are people like Nell Duke, and people like, let's see, why are my, this is my after grant kind of head fog. My arrows aren't working. It's usually
New form of dyslexia.
right. Right.
Digital dyslexia.
Yeah, Andrew's laughing at me. Deborah Rowe at Vanderbilt, and Patrick Gibson have a large IES grant right now. And this is another aspect of this that also isn't represented in the standards documents very well. But what they are looking at is children who are linguistically different, and looking at programs like Reading First, which come from the government, but trying to figure out how to adapt them in ways that all kids come from, no matter what background they come from. As I was reviewing this research today, I was thinking about opportunities for kids to talk through things like play and other sorts of things. It's something that doesn't happen with kids who are English language learners very often. And when you think about it, or kids that are really behind in reading, if you think about it, it's what you're really strong at because you're not reading. Your engagement is all about oral language. You want to maybe work with that. So a lot of Deborah's work focuses on helping teachers develop high levels of expertise in developing language with the kids through a variety of means. To the point where she talks about coaching to help with language development, but particularly to give teachers a firm understanding of what language development is and how to foster it is what a lot of the work is about. You might have heard that the so-called Vanderbilt study that came out last semester. Any of you hear about that? It was talking about early reading programs, federally funded early reading programs in Tennessee and Florida. Tennessee didn't look so good. Florida looked pretty good. Yeah, for a change. But the big reason that they found that the impact of the early literacy programs, daycares and a lot of school districts had hired extra early literacy people, was that in Tennessee, everybody got to do whatever the hell they wanted. And in Florida, they actually had an organized, intentional, deliberate plan that was focused on children's language development. Surprise, surprise, Florida ended up looking pretty good. And so the report landed last semester, and of course all the Tennessee legislators are looking at it and saying, let's just kill early childhood development in the state, rather than saying, well, maybe what we need to do is create better oversight and actually create some instructional kind of support to make it happen like Florida did. But Deborah's work is really kind of a testament to the fact you can't just leave this to accident. I mean, it's got to be deliberate, it's got to be structured, it's got to be focused. It's got to be heavily involved with language and conversation development among the kids. And that's a tricky kind of thing to do. I mean, if you ever taught an undergraduate class, I know Rachel does, you say, okay, now you talk. And it doesn't happen. Or you wanted to talk a particular sort of way. It doesn't, yeah, I noticed that too. So that's one bit of research that I think is really important. And then another bit, this is one of the studies that came out in Reading Research Quarterly not too long ago, is, and this goes back to your comment, Phil, about motivation, interest and agency in 2- and 3-year-olds' participation in emergent writing. And so if you sit there and you say, draw the letter P, damn it, it's not so much fun. Versus if you give them some paper and some crayons and a pencil and just walk out of the room, or stay there, but don't bother them. They will quite often come to what they would like to do. And these are 3 different areas where you'll see what they do just kind of naturally. But the key thing is that they've got to have access to the materials and the tools, similar to what Dick Allington said last week. Materials are things like books, and tools are things like paper and pencil and markers and things like that. I used to laugh because David Bloom at the University of Michigan wrote his dissertation was on what happens in kindergarten classrooms when we take the writing utensils away. And this was a qualitative study. And it was like 400 pages long. And let me see, you're all skilled researchers. Can you go to the results section and figure out what he found? This is with 4- and 5-year-olds. What?
Talk with each other.
Yeah, they did a lot of that. His interest in particular was writing.
Their writing skills.
They didn't write at all. They didn't have a pencil.
Right.
That's the finding. That was an early IES sponsored study, by the way. But it's the whole issue of, do they have access? One of the things that Kathy talked about was, as much as this seems print-based, you could also start thinking about issues like accessibility with iPads and games and technology-based kind of devices, ebooks, things like that, that are also part of that potentially play or literate kind of environment. So it's a huge thing is structuring that environment in ways that are actually going to make it work. Yeah, go ahead.
So I know that in the class portion,
Yeah.
Kathy mentioned that there does need to be some structure in
Yeah.
terms of you can't really let the kids run amok and do what they want. But in the sense that you were just mentioning, kind of handing them the materials, seeing where they go, such an open-ended situation, it seems like it could be disastrous for kids who are already below where they need to be.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to eventually be writing letters
Right.
because they don't know how.
Right.
So how do you compensate for that? Like, how do you allow some freedom, but help the kids who are not going to enjoy writing because they're struggling?
Well, that's where she talked about, I gave the example of the structure can come from things like, I've read the kid's story, now let's act it out.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a trigger of some sort that can create the next situation. We've read a story, let's act it out, let's act something out that we see to be creative dramatics, those sorts of things that kind of bound the situation. Have you ever wondered what it's like to swim in the Mississippi River? So creating it out of national context. Of course, all of us adults know that to answer that question is profound. But things that pose somewhat of an imaginative kind of scenario for them. Mark and I are avid comic book readers. We can think of all sorts of things in comic books that we could come up with and say to the kids, you know, something like, what superpower could you have if you could have any superpower?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, this general kind of prompts that focus on imagination, problem solving, might involve a text. This is the thing that's really kind of an interesting kind of conundrum. If you're doing something and you're engaging in play and there's no text there, still engaging in person. What do you all think? There's no text engaging in play, or are you still engaging?
When you say literacy,
Well, that's what I'm asking. Because a lot of people say there's no text, there's no literacy going on there.
according to the simple view of reading, it's zero.
Or Kathy made the point according to Piaget. No, there's no. Yeah.
I'd honestly take it from a neuroscience aspect, where play has been a developmental skill for a long time. Where you take a look at monkeys that play with stones, and that's been a way to develop the brain forever. And so one of the things you take a look at with children is you take a look at the fact that you have them play with crayons. Yes, because you're having them learn, and congratulations for that, but also because you're doing fine motor skills. So yeah, actually you are developing literacy, because what you're also doing, and any occupational therapist will talk to you about this, is if you don't want to help them with their homework, fine, throw out their books, and actually you can bring in a tin pan and a pair of chopsticks and help them move erasers from one to the other, and what you'll actually do is improve their handwriting, and you will have had absolutely no letters available to you, and you will actually develop the brain while you're at it. There are 1,000 different ways to approach play and literacy that have absolutely nothing to do with the book, and you can approach it because they're children and play is their natural habitat.
Yeah.
You want to approach their environment from their level because it is their level. You want to approach their world in play.
Great. Yeah, so Kathy said, I mean, they're going to play no matter what. And a lot of things that you're describing have to do with developing readiness, brain ready, getting things ready for what might happen once there's a text in front of you.
You're playing and talking with them, they're innovation happy. So when they read, they'll be ready to read.
Brent, what you said is exactly where I was thinking, and I think that sometimes what I see with adult literacy learners is that on some level they start to recognize the words that they use often, but one, they're not using a lot of words often because they don't have context in which to use them. And also you start to see that vocabulary drops off as does for everybody, the less frequently you use words. So that idea of having that conversation is, I think, especially important the lower your literacy is, and early literacy development they are by default the earliest literacy learners. They don't have real life context even. So like, it just blows my mind that you wouldn't call this literacy, because if you can't learn to speak, how are you going to learn how to read and write?
Yeah. There's a really important insight in what you just said, Rachel. They go around the city. I see a lot of people that look at the kids and say, well, they can't read and write, so we can't do it. And so what ends up happening is that the skills is focused on that without kids having ever been read to or having heard another kid read. So they're not getting any kind of experience in this sort of way. My grandson climbs up on my daughter's lap, creating a literate experience for himself, and he's driving. That's the kind of stuff that really creates readiness for when he does pick up. So, the other piece of this that's really important is peer knowledge and peer interaction that happens with play. And Kathy includes things like oral reading, just reading out loud that kids sometimes do. All by literature has to do with the effects of oral reading. When I first worked in schools in Lansing, Michigan, I saw everybody called round robin reading. You all know what that is? Oh. Yeah. And I went to Catholic. Torture. Yeah, I went to Catholic school and you just sit there. Okay, four people ahead of me. Okay, 4 paragraphs. Okay, now I can relax, and then the number would switch up. Calling. But what ends up happening, particularly with kids that are mixed in who are good readers and kids who are not so good readers, kids not so good readers modeling for other not so good readers. And so the oral language is a really important piece of all of this. But you have to kind of be careful about the situation you set up as the adult. Make sure that you're really driving reading instruction. Right? You don't.
Catherine Snow has this whole academic book.
Yeah.
Where she tries to introduce vocabulary to the day and kind of gives them academic thought that they kind of raise. But it's not like drill and practice on a whole bunch of academic words. It's more like an activity.
Right.
And where people talk about it and talk about
It's things like the term that I'm used to with characterizing that is functional versus direct. So academic talk is more functional, there's a purpose for it. If I, classic kind of lesson sort of on my career, but why do satellites stay up? That's the key question. There's vocabulary and paramount orbit, the speed limit, all that kind of stuff. So the language just kind of comes tagged along with the thing that's you're really interested in. That's where the most powerful kind of vocabulary happens. So if you think about things like that, you think about play scenarios that you can create where that kind of talk is going to happen. Kids are maybe going to embed language for what they see and hear and experience, which then the powerful thing of vocabulary instruction. You've experienced something and somebody says, well, by the way, you call it that. Then it's a whole lot easier to learn than, as I was taught to be an English teacher, the funny word beginning, the day to write the definition, and Friday I give the test, and Saturday. So it's that sort of difference. So that really captures kind of what I'm trying to show here, which is there's the official documents and stuff that people say ought to be happening that are really divorced from the way people learn, but that's predominating a lot of what's happening out there versus play literature and you see the way people learn is a whole lot like a lot of us like in a situation where you really, really want to know something, or there's a social reason for it. My buddy Andrew is such a techie that he knows. And those situations are great, kind of a need to know, and kind of drive reading. For a 3 or 4 year old kid, examples that Kathy uses are everyday life examples. Let's have a restaurant. Or let's be cops and robbers. Or in parks in my world, we read something in Superman. Now we're going to play it out, which is part of how we spent our whole Sky to Beauty. But that's the notion of play. That really driving experience.
What about things like let's blow up that building?
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, obviously it's harmful. But my brother and I, we had one of those games in the 60s that took one of those hockey games and plugged it in the wall with a big vibrator. We wondered what would happen if you sliced off the plug and took the 2 pieces apart and then plugged it into the wall then. And what happened? Yeah, we both got a shock and the whole house went dark. My father was a burly tool and die maker, came racing down the hall, ready to kill us. But it's that notion of play and experimentation that this law what Catherine talked about, I think is a critical part. Now, the thing that's driving me crazy is the whole system is focused on these linguistic skills. The thing I'm trying to think about is about these college-age tutors working with first graders and third graders. How in the heck do you get these notions of play back in?
There was just an article that I read that was talking, I get that you're talking about but
yeah.
There was an article that was talking about the difference between an Ivy League school and getting into college in the first place was 20,000 versus 100,000. I was thinking about that, talking about literacy, it's talking about the way parents talk to their children. It's talking about whether or not your parents talk to you, whether or not you're a latchkey kid, or whether or not you have 2 stable parents that are home every night talking to you, period. And the concept of play and the concept of safe neighborhood, the concept of, and before you even start thinking about kids that are big for kids, or kids that have a play environment in the first place, and you're thinking about that number, that 20,000 versus 100,000, and you start thinking about what it takes to get 100,000 persons to that daily play environment.
Yeah.
We actually audio record counting.
And there's some controversy around it in terms of who's doing it.
So this actually reminds me a little bit of my experience because I remember I didn't actually like English in 4th grade when they started to let us read books.
Right, chapter books. Yeah.
Before that, it was just, all this rote stuff. It was kind of awful. And so I think it almost failed with me. I almost learned not to like to read. And then they finally gave me books.
Yeah.
I realized, oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
When you're reading a book.
Yeah.
And so, I totally resonate.
Yeah. So take that thinking and then think about 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds.
Interesting that even like at the same time as same way when you're learning how to program, because both you're like, okay, so I can maybe print something on the screen, okay, so I can, but once you start to integrate everything together, you're also like, oh, this is pretty cool. Yeah. When you can really read a nice novel, interesting story about things you've never heard about before, then it's fun.
Yeah. And see, unfortunately, what happens in my experience a lot in the schools is that they'll take your experience and then they'll try to program it for everybody. And what they do is they forget that, well, that was Phil's experience, and maybe if Andrew was going to read something, it would be different, and his passions would be different. And that's a real dilemma the more we talk about this.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the fact that schools in general are based on the industrial faculty, and so there isn't a place for instruction. It's just what I was.
Yeah. So it means eventually you all will get your dream. Everybody will have a computer, and AI will take care of the rest.
Well, I do have come across recently I've been doing stuff on games,
Mhm.
serious games, where you gambling is fun.
Yeah.
And the whole process. Right. And the issue is, however, people get wrapped up in the computer and they're not moving in the real world.
Right.
And socially, sometimes even socially. And so we're so out of balance because of poor, the way classrooms and education occur. We've known about play for a long time. All of this has been knowledge around here a long time. How did we end up designing such a pathetic educational system?
Well, yeah, money. Yeah, I mean, Kathy talks about this in her PowerPoint, where I highly encourage you to listen to it. But she goes back almost 40 years. Because, play was a big deal back in the 70s and 80s. And then a fever pitch of research happened in the 90s. Yeah, in 2000, and virtually all the research went away. People just stopped, and you know what happened in 2000. Got these government kind of things that focus around linguistic skills, and motivation and play were part of it. He's claiming that it's coming back. And you see some of the things coming out of our governor's office here yesterday. Teachers got permission to no longer have the students' test scores involved in the evaluation. So there's a rolling back. If you are interested in kind of movements in education, read David Lavery's work in the American High School. He talks about the swing back and forth between high-stakes testing environments and democratic kind of environments. And so we kind of hit the end of the pendulum where we're focusing on beating up the kids with achievement test scores and teachers, and now it's swinging back. Say, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And then things like play and other sorts of things come in favor.
You should go to Montessori school for something like that. People get to learn at their own pace, discovery.
I think that's what Kathy would probably advocate. The programs aren't perfect. We look at views and research around preschools. Even Start is the only one that's ever proven effective. Head Start's up there. Head Start does pretty well, but Congress is continuing to try to fill it. And so there are a lot of people, if you went around the community, there's a whole bunch of different preschools that will market a particular kind of approach, or Gillingham approach, or all sorts of. And for my money, I would rather just go in and kind of see what they're doing and read Kathy's research and say, does this program have kind of these features of immersion in literate environments, choice, structure that actually kind of moves kids into literate kind of learning, that kind of stuff. You could look at Montessori, and even Montessori programs can be different. So where my alarm bells go off is when everybody focuses on the tasks and not on the kids. And that's true almost across the whole system. But I see somebody that's more concerned about delivering a worksheet and not paying attention to responsiveness in kids. That's problematic. And you'll see that in Kathy's research. A lot of what she's focusing on. We pay attention to kids. Because they're going to do what they're going to do. And whether we build on that and maximize it, that's our responsibility.
Well, the idea with Montessori, I thought, was really like 200 different types of materials that have embraces to get people to thinking and developing. And you notice the child and see if that's when they're within their zone. And I don't know where choice comes from.
Well, it's the sort of thing. It's very subtle and kind of complicated with little kids because if I go up to a 3-year-old and say, "What do you want to do?" I'm likely to get some kind of strange answer back. Versus, as is kind of one of the points Kathy makes, I have the stuff there and I have it out and I watch the kid and the kid see how they respond and then move from there. So and that's where Debbie Rose's research is difficult to teach a teacher how to do. Because what we want to do is we want to get in there and do stuff. But when, in fact, what you might need to do is have stuff, but watch the kid. And that's kind of the essence of what's tricky about this stuff.
Mark, I totally agree with your last slide. It's just funny that we've had this exciting talk about play, and I agree that it is play, but essentially what we're doing is giving really little kids exposure to what they might, what adult things look like. So
Yeah.
while we're giving them play, we're really giving them, instead of this weird school that they'll never do,
Yeah.
we're giving them things that are gonna look like the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So play, but their life.
I spent a time in my 40s where I played with airplanes. I had a ball. And, you know, I wouldn't take a 4-year-old, teach a 4-year-old to do it. But there's something analogous to that. I mean, there's something that grabs you, and you can run with it as the instructor or the teacher. And that's the essence of play.
In the Steinkooler stuff on games, we found that people, on some games like World of Warcraft, that they really got into it, these kids were reading 4 grades above the level they should be reading, spending hours trying to figure it out in order to do the game. And so, where it shoots out of the water, any simple-minded play of.
Definitely with RPGs, like, I mean, you know, maybe like mindless racing games, maybe not quite so much, but like, I remember like noticing people all around me growing up. Like, I played a lot of RPGs growing up, and you know, me and some of my friends that would, like, we would say, like, granted, some of them were more esoteric words, but you know, we would say these words, and like some of our peers would like, no idea what that.
Yeah.
And so definitely the text-based RPGs, I would say, makes a lot of sense.
And you're on secret little phone.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, less and less text-based RPG. I grew up in the same, or probably a little older than you. I remember playing Zork. Where it was all words.
Yeah.
And I imagine that helped my literature development a lot. If I were playing, some of these more modern games where everything was being spoken to me, I wonder if
The one thing, because I always feel like gaming helped me to be a better reader, but the one thing I don't know is whether or not better readers play RPG. And that's kind of my suspicion, because I don't think you see, like when they implement these text-based role-playing games for readers, they don't seem to have the same success as they do to people who read before they played RPG. So that's a little bit of my concern, is what's driving what.
Yeah. That's a tricky part of it.
It was more of a comment, and it goes back to the thought process that we're talking about. The fact that Bergman often talk about the fact that it helps with hand-eye coordination to video games, and so you might want to think about the fact that there are more benefits than you can think about having had video games. And one thing is, I guess we're talking about literacy, but the new technology.
It's all part of it.
New technologies are unexplored. And so when it comes right down to it, there are more than one type of video game. And so it's a new avenue, and you don't know what to do at this point in time with video games. I actually kind of love video games as far as what they do for education and for it's a new platform.
And the real tricky part of that is the kids will gravitate toward that. Adults may have no idea what they're doing or what they're doing. That's the tough part. Here in Domingo, the person who studies Filipino Americans in Massachusetts, with a particular group of Republican whites, Filipino American people, who are astonishingly good at creating and playing their own video games. They would do absolutely nothing. They're failing. Yeah, they have their own group of kids. They play each other's games, and they remarkable multimedia creations. And what Mary studied was the importance of that. Left open the question, they're not participating in school in a way that's going to get them somewhere, but they don't care. So they're this other side of it has to is the life of social action, even with 3 or 4-year-olds. Sometimes they're just not going to let us know. Right, I think there's a lot going on.
But if it can be controlled, if it can be adapted, it might be just another way.
Oh yeah, I agree. So you can imagine going into the schools that we grew up in and saying, okay, we got to scrap that. We got to make this video with the way that we train.
While they were watching TV.
Yeah.
When we are training programs for getting them to model the system.
Yeah.
They can work hard, hours and hours and hours.
Well, next week we have Adrian Williams, my friend. She stepped down from his School Seed Collaborative Action Network. She most recently has her finger on all of these people data city members, and she's working on some things involving systems theory, thinking about how you turn literacy into a common city. So we'll be here in person to talk about that next week. Thank you.
Let's see if I remember to hit record.
Where is that?
Check looking, I realized, that might be a little bit